Well, Jack Rowlett, the political commentator with Young Voices UK, is here. Jack, good morning.
Good morning.
So this bold plan the Prime Minister has that's going to take a few years to deliver, how convinced are you by the fact or the plan he'll have to be able to deliver it?
Not remotely convinced, to be quite frank. I think ultimately politics is about trade-offs and it's about prioritisation. And the Prime Minister so far in office has demonstrated that he's not prepared to act on either. He's made a big deal about the fact that at the budget last week, he feels that the party made the right choices for Britain, and that those with the broadest shoulders have been asked to contribute their fair share. But essentially, the people he's making out to be the people with the broadest shoulders are graduates who've been squeezed by stagnant wages for best part of a decade. We had 14 years of a Conservative government that governed primarily in the interests of pensioners. We now have a Labour government that seems determined to govern in the interests of those on welfare, and that is not consistent with the promise at the last general election that this was going to be a government that was going to prioritise growth. Its policy agenda is completely incoherent.
Rachel Reeves would completely refute those claims. She says sort of welfare won't be her legacy. She's not the welfare chancellor, and that actually she's really proud to be the chancellor who will lift more children out of poverty in lifting the two-child benefit cap. Her justification for some of these decisions, Jack, she said, look, what we want is what they've now got, a £22 billion fiscal headroom as a cushion for any future financial shocks. She's basically saying, I need to make sure that in a year's time, I don't have to do this all over again.
Yeah, and I think on that she is right, but I would sort of dispute the idea that she's had the courage of her convictions and actually come out and said, well, these are my priorities. This is why I'm freezing these tax thresholds, making these fiscal decisions. Actually, we've had a whole lot of nonsense about there being a huge black hole in the public finances in order to justify Labour's increased spending on welfare and refusal to reform it in a meaningful way. Now, if that's your political decision, fine, but have the courage of your convictions to come out and explain why you believe that that's a priority and why you believe you should be squeezing working people in order to fund it. The government needs to decide what its priorities are.
Well, I think one of Rachel Reeves' priority was to cut the welfare budget, but as she discovered, that was not the priority of her colleagues, the other Labour MPs. And politically, they lost the argument within their party, which is what then led to that pretty humiliating climb down where they couldn't cut welfare to the degree that she wanted to.
Well, I think leaders lead, ultimately. And if you're losing the argument on such a massive issue, then you are not fit to serve in that office. And actually, although, yes, of course, you're correct, they did back down over those welfare reforms in the summer. And that's clearly resulted in more spending on welfare at the moment than they would have liked. The other decisions that she's made, for example, this nearly 10% increase in the minimum wage for 18 to 20-year-olds, the increases in national insurance for employers that we saw last year, those decisions are making it harder for employers to employ young people and pushing more young people onto welfare. And that's a decision, that is a choice that she has made.
Yeah, well, absolutely, definitely. We were talking about, and when you realise that she had over £4 billion of headroom, the tax rises she then made were definitely a choice. And those are the choices she's having to currently defend. Someone who was recently in quite a lot of hot water but has been out of the limelight was, of course, the previous Deputy Prime Minister, Angela Rayner. But there is a piece in the Times today saying that Angela Rayner faces a fresh tax controversy over her Westminster flat. What is the allegation here?
Yeah, so the allegation is that the former Deputy Prime Minister has breached the ministerial code because she has this grace and favour, or had this grace and favour residence, and that the council tax on it was not properly paid. This council tax surcharge on second homes that was introduced in Westminster earlier this year. Now, the government says that it's the government that's responsible for paying council tax on those grace and favour properties, and it wouldn't actually have been Angela Rayner's responsibility to ensure that was paid herself. But I think this is one of those stories where actually the subtext is more important than the story itself, because it doesn't really seem like Angela Rayner has done much wrong here. But obviously the Prime Minister is in hot water this morning. The budget is unravelling. And we also, as it was reported over the weekend, that Angela Rayner is sort of considering her next moves after the government indicated that it was going to water down its workers' rights legislation. So I think this is sort of potentially, sort of cynically, maybe the government or people in government briefing against Angela Rayner because they're worried that she might be sort of trying to wheedle her way back in and potentially launch a leadership challenge in the future.
Do you think there's a path for her to do that?
I think there probably is a path within the party. She remains hugely popular with both MPs and the membership. I think it remains to be seen whether she could make the case to the country that she deserves a second chance after what we saw happen earlier this year.
Yeah, well, absolutely. It's been interesting to see how she will plot. We've been reading in the Times over the weekend that she's plotting some sort of comeback and what shape that will take. And as you mentioned, she is, particularly in some parts of the party, hugely popular because she sort of really represents that Labour success story. So we will see what her next moves might be. A story that lots of the papers are covering this morning. The headline here is "Cover-up of SAS Afghanistan war crimes deliberate," the inquiry was told. There is a current inquiry going on, and the Times is reporting that a cover-up of potential war crimes in Afghanistan appeared to follow a conscious decision by the Director of UK Special Forces. What is alleged to have happened?
Yeah, so this is the story that as you say, it's being alleged that this was a conscious decision, and that a senior officer says he believes that statistics from deliberate detention operations in the country didn't seem credible and rang alarm bells, and that this view was shared and the information wasn't treated correctly, wasn't acted upon. I mean, this is an appalling story if it's true, and it's something that immediate action needs to be taken upon if indeed the inquiry does find that these claims are credible. I mean, it's such an appalling incident because it almost puts a stain on the sort of sacrifices that people made in Afghanistan, and I think it's just awful when things like this happen because the sort of bad behaviour of a few individuals can really tar the reputation of people who were prepared to make the ultimate sacrifice for their country.
Yeah, this is the accusation from Afghan families accusing UK Special Forces of conducting, I'm quoting here, a campaign of murder against civilians, whilst claiming that senior officers and personnel sought to prevent adequate investigation. Well, that inquiry continues. I know we've had many conversations about the strength of inquiries and to what extent they can be effective, but the Times is reporting the details as we get them. Shall we look at something a little bit lighter, shall we? The Sycamore Gap, not light at all when it happened. Lots of people really grieving just such an iconic landmark. It has been fascinating to learn far more about the police operation, to find out who the suspects were and then find them. Of course, that shocking piece of video evidence, absolutely sort of slam dunk, when they've recorded themselves cutting down the tree. Two things stood out for me in this investigation, Jack. The first was what members of the public report when you ask them, and the degree of suspicion people had about their neighbours, friends, anyone with a chainsaw, anyone that they didn't like. And then also some pretty crafty police detective work to try and identify then who these suspects were, which obviously ultimately was completely successful.
Yeah, it is fascinating. It's exactly the sort of story that often takes place in a smaller community when you see something like this happen. Yeah, some of the stuff that the public were reporting was insane. There was an artist who'd done a sort of picture of this tree with a UFO over the top, and they were sort of suspected for it, and people sort of pointing their fingers at neighbours who were making light of the scandal or sharing odd posts on Facebook. It's quite funny stuff, really. Even if the underlying crime is a serious one and quite a sad one to have happened. And yeah, it is interesting when you read about this and the way they matched this wedge of wood that was taken as a trophy to scarring on the piece of the trunk of the tree. It's a novel technique which I wasn't aware of until this morning.
Neither. So the police, when they got to the crime scene, sawed off the top of the Sycamore Gap stump so they could sort of preserve, I'm quoting here, the integrity of that first cut. So later on, detectives, when they found the two suspects, they had taken a wedge of wood as a trophy, really, of what they'd done, and therefore they could literally, like a jigsaw, match up together that piece from the Sycamore Gap with the one that they had then stolen and taken home. So brilliant police work, but also a brilliant insight into local communities who were basically reporting anyone who had a chainsaw that they didn't like, or anyone who they thought didn't like trees and didn't like. Channel 4 have done a 2-part documentary that starts on Wednesday. It's definitely, I think, going to be worth watching. I will be. Final thing, Jack. You would expect for the Marines they would be quite busy, but they had a very unusual day because a reindeer went on the run from a Christmas grotto for 8 hours. Tell us what happened.
Yeah, so this reindeer went missing from Santa's Enchanted Forest on Merseyside, and he had to be tracked down by the Royal Marines using thermal imaging technology. I love this story. It's really got me in the Christmas mood this morning. It takes a lot to get me in the Christmas mood, actually, especially so early in December. But seeing this reindeer tracked down and back safely, I should say, having been rescued, is a wonderful start to the festive season, I think.
Yes, a perfect way to start Advent, and the reindeer eventually settled and has now been secured and is being well looked after. Jack, thank you very much. Jack Rowlett, the political commentator from Young Voices UK, going through the papers.